Welcome to this episode of the Strong and Kind podcast. This episode is with Shelly Belk. Shelly is a behavior analyst and honestly someone I would probably put in the category of a behavior change coach or a mindset coach. She teaches breath work. She also is just an incredible question asker, and she really can help people break through their self-limiting beliefs in a lot of realms of life, in particularly like with personal development and where I've had a tremendous amount of opportunity to learn from Shelly has been in the entrepreneurial space. So Shelly was an awesome conversation. It really was impactful, and I hope you get some value out of it. Thanks for being here. Peace. How are you this morning?
Pretty good. Forgot it was picture day for my daughter, so that was a little bit of a mad rush, but we're back on track.
So let's jump in right there because I'm about to be a parent, and I think one thing that I'm already navigating is like self-judgment over like how good of a parent you are or what like that type of crap that comes up.
Yeah.
Because I also see it in like my siblings, like my sister-in-law, like we were coaching little kids soccer, and like she just like talks negatively about herself even though she's coaching the kids team, which nobody else does, right? And like then it's like, oh, I forgot XYZ, and it's like, yeah, it happens. But how much of that do you navigate with your background?
Yeah, it's funny because with my background, it like takes overthinking to like a whole new level because now you're just like not just like overthinking, but then you're like over analyzing and like thinking of all the possible futures of this child that you're gonna mess them up and all the things because like you know too much. Like, you know what I mean? Like sometimes I'm
Yeah.
like, I feel like I know too much. Um, and I think I would say I go through periods of feeling like maybe I'm like not doing enough or I'm not a good mom. I don't think it consumes me too much because I do, with my background, I'm able to like pause and be like, okay, like what's this bringing up for me? Like, is this just a projection? All of the things.
Hmm.
Um, and so like for instance, today, like I forgot it was picture day. I mean, I didn't forget, like, right. I can say the words of like, I forgot it was picture day, but like
Yeah.
I got her to school with her hair nice and a
Yeah.
shirt she liked and like all is well. You know what I mean? But
Yeah.
sometimes we so focus on like I didn't pick it out the night before and blah blah blah. And so yeah, I'm not really beating myself up because my husband's been working for 48 hours and I'm solo parenting and it's just kind of like, well, yep, it was just one of those things that I missed.
Hmm.
And it's like not the end of the world. And I think that for you to hear we're in the age of social media and all of these things and all the ways that we can compare ourselves. And I just like really look at that we all have our own unique s- special ways of being and what we bring and offer to the world. And like I look at these moms that are insanely crafty, like in freaking insanely crafty. They're always thinking of like the next custom shirt and sticker to put on their water bottle and all the things. And I'm like, oh, like I don't do that for Maven. And she's starting to notice those things. And part of it is like when I talk to them, they're like, yeah, my mom was totally like that. Oh, well, my mom was a single mom of 4 and was
Yeah.
totally not like that, you know what I
Yeah.
mean? So it's like, okay, there's, like, how we were raised and all of the things, but also, like, I bring, like, a lot of emotional support for her and a lot of perspective and a lot of wisdom,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? So it's like, that's my gift, and I'm just gonna keep leaning into that gift, and of course, the judgment, like, comes up from that.
There's like the Joseph Campbell quote of like the opportunity of a lifetime is becoming who you are. Like, and I always go back to that because it's like it's so easy to compare and it's so easy to see like, oh, they're good at X, Y. And I did this I think I'm like at 36, I'm finally still kind of like I'm just started to get better at it. Right. But like so much of my youth, and it really we're gonna get into like inner child stuff and eventually here because I think it's super meaningful, and I but like tracing back our lineages, like Mary's familial tree and then my familial tree before we got married was so informative because it was like, oh shit, like this is why my mom's the way my mom is, like, and I love my mom, I love my parents, but like they're the way they are because of the way their parents were.
Yeah.
And then like and I think every generation gets a little bit people get a little bit better, but now we're just in this information age where, like, yeah, you can go online and you can, I mean, I'm a product of internet psychoanalyst that, I'm an internet psychoanalyst. Like, I'm just figuring out like all these different theories and stuff, and it's really easy to get a little bit of knowledge and go down a giant freaking self-confirmation like hole that in the end doesn't really serve you. And I see that in like physical therapy all the time. Like, I got this problem, and it's like, well, yeah, like you've got that problem, but you've actually like, let's just keep doing the thing, right? What like yeah, do you feel like people do you feel like people just like get sucked into their problems in a way that they're just trying to solve stuff all the time, when it's like, yeah, you kind of just need to like live, like just put it down, right? But why
Yeah.
is that so hard for people to do?
Oh my goodness, such a good question. I think people are very much addicted to their problems, because if we're trying to fix them and solve them, then it feels like we're doing something. But
Hmm.
then that means like we're disconnected from the being part of the human being, right?
Mm,
And and I think that also again society's told us that like we should be doing something, we should be achieving something, we should always be growing and figuring things out, and none of that is wrong, right? Like no one's going to say like stop doing all of that stuff. Of course not, but there's just this like overemphasis on it. Um and why is it hard for people to get out of that? Was that the question?
yeah,
Because then you'd really have to sit with yourself.
yeah.
Like what's that study that they put, it was like particularly men, I think, that they put them in a room and they're like, you're just going to be in here for like 15 minutes with nothing in the room. And the only thing that was in there was a button that could electrocute themselves. And it was like an insane amount of them chose to do that after like 3 to 5.
70% of people, I think it was like seven, I don't know the exact, but it was like most people chose to shock themselves as opposed to being bored. Yeah.
Yeah. But it's not even like, but I- you could say boredom, right? I'm not going to
Yeah.
like rewrite the study, but it's like being with your thoughts, being with
Yeah.
physical sensations, not having any distractions, because what is there to solve in a room that has nothing? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I think too, when we really get to the complexities of life, like there some things like don't have answers. Like when we start
Yeah.
asking ourselves those big questions, like you can spiral big time, but like what one of my mentors was like, "Why are we asking questions that don't have answers? Like, why are we getting stuck on that?" And I'm like, "Oh my gosh, you're so right."
There there's some philosophical principle that like things come down to basically like at the end of the day, if you just keep asking why, like it's just there's like just three overarching things that we're trying to figure out at all times. It's like, why are we here? Like, what's the meaning of this stuff? And then like, how do I make myself comfortable, kind of type of thing.
Yeah.
I can't remember that way that is, but or what that was called. I'll figure it out. It'll come to me. So, okay, you became a behavioral analyst. Why
Yeah.
did you set out to do that in the first place?
Oh my God, I love this question. I was one of those people where it was just like, well, this is what you just do next.
Yeah.
And that's not to say, so I got my undergrad in psychology and I knew I wanted to work with children. And I was like, well, I don't, next step, like I very quickly realized that like an undergrad in psychology doesn't mean anything. Like if you want to do anything, you have to go on to either get your master's or your PhD. And I
Yep.
wasn't quite sure I wanted to go that route. Like all those hours sounded really scary to me. And now in hindsight, that probably would have been like the perfect route, but not really, right? Like I'm here.
It
Um,
doesn't, yeah. That's the hard part, is like there's so many tangential paths that you could have taken, and
yeah,
a lot of them you probably even still end up the same general thing. Like the grass is greener thing, that like Frank Benedetto talks about all the time, is like, oh, leaving the profession of like a physical therapist for some other profession, like you're just gonna get into the same exact shit that you're trying to leave your job for now. Or I look at it honestly, one of my buddies and me were like, we were joking because he had a friend, it was a friend of a friend of mine, who's like, dude, I think I'm gonna leave my wife. And it's like, why? There was like a girl at work. He had like three kids, and it's like, you think you're gonna like make your life better by going with somebody else? Like you're just gonna create the same exact shit over and over again, right? But
yeah,
people don't get that. They think there's
no.
something better out there, right?
No, yeah. I think all of us fall trapped to that at some point,
Yeah.
right? Some versions are more extreme than others, but
Yes. That was an
um
extreme version. It was dumbass, but yeah.
But yeah, so then I had a friend that was like, "Well, I'm working with autistic children and you start as like a junior therapist and blah blah blah." And I was like, "Okay, like let's try it." Well, I was pretty good at it, like pretty, instinctual. I was getting burnt out very quickly, so I very quickly found out that that type of therapy has the highest burnout rate than any other job like ever.
Hmm.
And then I had one supervisor who I was like telling her, I was like, I'm not really sure I'm gonna do this anymore. She was like, what do you mean? Like, I see myself in you. And I loved her as a supervisor. She was like, I really think that you could go on and become a BCBA and blah blah blah. And her instilling that in me was like, wow, like I didn't see that within myself, which I think is awesome. Like we talk a lot about like borrowing other people's beliefs and things like that. But at the
Hmm.
same time, I can look back and see that that was like very wounded. Like an authority figure, someone that I respected, really saw something and a potential for me that I didn't see in myself, and I wanted to like be the good little girl that did what she wanted me to do. And so
Hmm.
then I applied for my master's, and I went, through that whole process, and then I became the clinical supervisor doing that stuff, and then I just like couldn't do it anymore. But yeah, so I love my background. I think it makes me an incredible coach. I see patterns really quickly. But what I have my degree in is like very different than what I'm doing. I feel like it just informs what I'm doing, but I
Hmm.
don't know that yeah, like that. I don't feel like it was like, oh, like this is what I want to do. It just kind of all just evolved and unfolded and all the things.
Yeah. Yeah. It's I think what's interesting, I mean, how like I even came to know you, like there's just been like you just kind of have to like go and trust life a lot of times, right? Um, which is very hard for people because I think so much of the narrative growing up is that you kind of need to have it all figured out, right? Like when you're asked what, like, hey, what, you're 8 years old, what do you want to do when you grow up? Like, you freaking have no conception of what's out there in the world, and yet it's like, I want to be a doctor, or, and if you have the audacity to like give a concrete answer, right? And then it's like, I felt so guilty for the longest time. I said I wanted to be a Navy SEAL at 12 years old. I did not know what that entailed, other than like it was like these badass dudes, right?
Right.
And there's still a part of me that like feels like, you should have tried it, but it doesn't matter anymore. But like the amount of guilt that I had in like my mid 20s for like saying I wanted to do it for like 10 years and then not doing it was like terrible. But that's what happens, is like we think there's this path that we should follow, and when we're not following it, that's one of the biggest things I think about all the time is like, hey, like, we can talk about goals and that type of stuff too, but it's like, I don't know, or like, people feel like if they don't have their life freaking just plotted out perfectly, like they're failing. And it's like, that's, nobody is actually doing that. The people are just like trusting that their intention and their growth is going to take them where they want to go. Um, because like you'll drive yourself crazy trying to figure out the perfect path, right?
Yeah.
Um, and
I think
like, but go ahead.
Well, I think when I was going through that and like considering quitting my job and really making this shift, it might have been Brene Brown, but like it just resonated. Like it was like the time that I needed to hear that was like, if you think that you have your life figured out, like that it's supposed to be this way, you're on somebody else's script, because your
Yeah.
life is literally unfolding one step at a time. Like you should never know exactly what your life is going to look like. And I was like, it was like such a paradigm shift for me that was like, oh my gosh, like I'm so operating on what everyone else expects of me, and I should never actually really truly have it figured out.
Yeah.
It was just a permission slip, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. Because there's so much more in the unknown that is awesome than staying in just the known realm of stuff. Like, 3-ish years ago, if I was gonna say like, even just like, I know it's silly, I'm not like, this podcast isn't making me money per se, but it's something that's part of like the ecosystem of like my business, like, just, and it's something I really enjoy doing, right? And like, a lot of people, you could look in from the outside and it's like, well, you're not making any money off that podcast, but like, I'm making money off of putting out content over the course of, and bringing in people that want to work with me. So like, yeah, I am. But like, it's just my thinking about that type of thing 3 years ago was so drastically different. Like, it was just all, well, how's this going to benefit me for like next week, right? How's this gonna, but like, whereas like the longer you can get yourself to play like the game, and actually like trust that it's gonna pay off, the better it works out. But we just get stuck in honestly, like making ends meet is a big piece of it. Like I'm a lot less afraid of like, am I gonna be able to make ends meet like now than I was like 3 years ago, right? Even though even then we were relatively fine. Like I would just go back to like drug addicts find a way to get drugs. Like I know, like it's
Totally.
like these people have no money.
They'll wake up early and stand in line for the liquor store to like open, like they're gonna make a
Yeah. They're
way.
figuring out weird ways to make money so that they can get their drugs. And like you, a functioning adult in society, can figure out how to, like make more money or do what you need to do, really. Like a big portion of this that I wrote down is just I just want to talk about like self-limiting beliefs, right? And kind of confirmation bias that comes from that type of stuff and how people ultimately work through them. The other big topic I just want to foreshadow is like just like exposure therapy and like doing the shit that scares you. But let's talk self-limiting beliefs for a little bit. So when you work with somebody, like how do you go about figuring kind of maybe a what they want and then what's holding them back? Like what does your process look like for that?
Amazing. Um, so everyone has self-limiting beliefs. Like, let's just clear that up. Like,
Yeah.
no one is immune to that. Um, and I'm often trying, I think what people don't realize is like most people have a really difficult time like knowing what it is that they actually want. People are
Yeah.
very clear on what they don't want, and that can be a good place to start, but like we can't, that's not like when we're like shooting like for a target, we're not focused on like what we don't want. Like there's so
Yeah.
many things that then now we don't actually know which way that we're going. So I'll kind of start there, like what's working, what's not working, what's missing, and try to like paint the picture of like, okay, well if those things weren't happening in your life, like what would life look like instead? What do you want life to look like? A lot of the times people think it's like very very tangible things, but it's kind of like, what state of being do you want to be in? How do you want to wake up and feel, consistently in the morning? How do you want to feel when you're ending your day? Because then we can kind of reverse engineer that. um I mean, I typically don't really work with people that don't have any sort of goal or some sort of target that they're aiming for. It's just not as
It's kind
efficient.
of like a red flag for you. It's like,
It's
okay, well, you need to go do some work to figure that out before we can even
Totally, right?
begin.
There's
Yeah.
probably like a lot that you need to unpack and just
Yeah.
need to be, held in with someone else. But if you're like, no, I'm like, I want to be able to like break through this thing so that I can have this, then, I'm your girl. Because then what we look at is like all the ways that you're holding yourself back, whether that's excuses, justifications, what fears you have around it, what negative associations you have around it. But oftentimes like we're excavating those things, and my approach is like, okay, let's like look at your values, because that's also going to tell you like what you want your life to look like what's
Mm,
actually important and meaningful for you. And now let's make sure that your actions are matching that. And I tell them the first week, you're going to screw up, you're not going to do it, and that's the point. That's when the coaching begins, because
mhm.
now we get to poke holes and see like where where was the fear, where was the limitation, where were sometimes it's planning, right? It's not always just like only limiting beliefs as to why we're not doing
Yeah.
those things, but a lot of the time it is. And so really building that awareness. But once we start getting into that inner child work, now we're looking at like the core beliefs that are really driving the boat there.
Yeah. I no, I think that process is self-reflection and like so and you in there it's like anything. It can become overly toxic. Like or not overly toxic. It can become disadvantageous to do that, but most people never actually like sit and reflect, right? And actually like dig into what they want and how to go about. Also people just don't realize how complicated they are. Like
Yeah.
um I mean, I was just literally like talking to somebody and not too long ago, and it was about like their weight, and they want to do like a lifting competition, but they don't want to weigh in, and it's like, okay, we got to like tease out what this is about, right? Because it's okay for you not to like, it's okay for you to do whatever you want to do, but if you want to do the lifting competition, like that's part of this is
That's
like
your requirement. Yeah.
is you have to weigh in right? And then it's just like, what's that really about? Is it about the objective number on the scale? And it's like, and it makes you feel a certain way, which that feeling, and this is where we can get into like some Joe Dispenza type stuff. That feeling is just the story that you've continued to perpetuate about something that happened to you in the past, right? Like your brain really is just this record of the past that like you have emotions associated with it, and you're just carrying that shit around until you can figure out how to let it go, and that it's not really serving you anymore, because it did serve you maybe at some point, or at least maybe protected you, right? But we don't think about it that way. Um, but like when it comes to, and I like that you said like yeah, if you don't have a starting point, like I can't really work with you. Like and maybe if somebody does want to work with you and but they don't really have necessarily like a starting point. Like what are the things you recommend they do prior to maybe like working with you to find their starting point?
Yeah, I mean, some people it would be a suggestion of therapy or even just like try like being willing to just like trial and error some things. Like, right, if they're like, well, I don't even know what lights me up, things like that. That's usually could even be a red flag of like, do you have a little bit of a trauma response there of like, those kinds of things and really kind of exploring that. Um but oftentimes, like, even, I might try to be like, well, let's see if we can identify values. But even that, if they're just like, I don't know, like, I can't choose, it's like they're too stuck in like the current state that they're in to even imagine that a
Yeah,
future them could look different or that they can change. They're just not ready for change. And that's okay. Like, I want to normalize that. Like, all of us will be stuck at that point, and it's almost like I'd rather you choose that powerfully than constantly be spinning your wheels and just like know that the time will come when you're ready to like call yourself on your BS.
yeah, yeah,
Because some people will just get so stuck in that and it almost like it digs this like deeper hole of like I can't ever get out of this. I'm always going to be this way versus if you were just like I'm not in a season for growth and change right now and letting that be okay, I think is a much more powerful choice.
yeah, yeah. I think the recognition that everybody's on their own timeline and shit usually takes longer than we want is also a piece of it. Like, yes, there are people that like they make a change and their life, the trajectory of their life goes like well, right? Like fast. But usually there's a lot of shit underneath the surface that you didn't see that like kind of led that to any there anyway. But yeah, most things just take longer than we want to take, which is also a big part of navigating this stuff. Like if we want to just get really practical, like when you were when you were doing more powerlifting oriented stuff, like you wanted your squat to get better in like a 6 week time frame most of the time, right? And it's like it actually after a certain point it takes just longer for things to happen, and like that's usually like where coaching comes in, is like, hey, actually like still doing good, just focus on the process, right? Like then let's get a little objective and then reconfigure things here. But which I do want to get into, how important is like physical health to just like, I really don't like to dichotomize mental and physical health. I think they're just the same, like
Yeah.
but we have let's say in society made physical and mental health somewhat of a dichotomy. I really don't think you're going to be mentally healthy unless you're feeling capable to live life the way you want to. But like how important is it for people to have physical activity as part of their life, and like striving in that, I honestly think striving in that way is often a really good gateway to then figuring out like kind of what you want more out of your life. But you tell me your opinion.
Yeah, my opinion is, nervous system regulation is such a buzzword right
Hmm.
now. And there's like so many different vagus nerve stretches and, all these things that you can do. But if you talk to anyone in that realm, they will say sleep is king.
Yeah.
You want to
Yeah.
you want to regulate your nervous system?
Go to
Get
bed.
quality sleep,
Yeah.
move your body, and eat nourishing food, right? Like, and it's like all the things that we've always heard, but now it's like, and I'm not gonna say that like it's just like people are trying to find other ways to sell. I mean, I do think that it's like almost over talked about now. Like,
Oh
have you seen the like somatic
yeah, it's
workouts to melt your fat away and blah blah blah? Do I believe that there's like an aspect of that? Sure. But it's like, no, like we still just need to like work on the basics.
yeah.
And I agree. I don't think there's a separation to physical and mental health. It's all the same. Like as we're learning more and more, like emotions are stored in your body. I don't think that working out alone is a substitute for working on yourself. Like I cringe every time that someone's like, working out is my therapy or blah blah blah. And it's like I would say 95% of the people that work with me are have already worked on their physical fitness. I think it's like the gateway drug. Like I always joke
Yeah.
it's the gateway drug
Yeah.
because yeah, you're feeling more physically capable. I know for myself, I was I had, like, what I would call fake confidence, but it wasn't until I think I really started lifting that I was like, "Oh, shit, like, I'm so capable," right? Like, it
Yeah.
translated into real true confidence, not just because I was getting stronger and better, but because I overcame injuries and I overcame, those lulls where you're like, "Wow, okay, maybe I got a 1-pound PR in the last 2 years," like, things like that, right?
Yeah.
Being willing to have feedback from a coach because you're like, haven't you be seen? Like they're looking at your numbers. They're like, well, how come you
Yeah.
only worked out 2 times this week or whatever? You know what I
Yeah.
mean? It's like it's really easy to just hide over here by yourself. Um, but so many of the people that I work with, they've tried therapy in the past, and then they were like, "Well, I thought working out was my therapy." And it's like, "No, dude, like that was like the opening, the gateway for
Yeah.
you to have like body awareness."
Yeah.
And because most of the time, you're not like thinking about how mom taught you to be this overachiever and da 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 while you're working out, right? Like it can feel cathartic. Like I had like such a stress response last Friday. Like it was wild. I haven't had anything like that in literally years. And I like did half the things I did, like, wrong, like, I knew not to do, and I was like, "Ooh, this is a big one because 'cause I'm in resistance to doing the stuff that I know works." I went
Yeah.
to the gym, I felt great for 1 hour, and then the same thought loop came
Yeah.
up when I was done, right? Like, so you'll feel good when you're doing it, and of course, there's benefits for your entire life, but it's like you can't use that as a substitute for doing some of the deeper work. So, I kinda answered your question and kinda not, but
Well, you take me down one of the rabbit holes of one of my favorite I mean, the fitness space and like the food space are such like I'm gonna use the word cesspools. Cesspools of like, hey, how do we find something new to market to people who are honestly just they're literally like all most of the marketing around like those things are like to people who are just super uninformed, right? Like, hey, even dichotomizing food into like good and bad is not productive, especially for like little kids. Like you tell a kid that a Reese's peanut butter cup, and if as long as they can eat a Reese's peanut butter cup, is like bad, like, and then they want to have one when they're with their friends or something like that. That shit pisses me off because it's like, yeah, it's here's the other thing is like there's little kids in Africa who don't get enough calories, and we're telling kids here that hey, like you should feel bad about having access to food, right? Now, should we eat apples? Should we eat good foods? Yes, right? Like, but it's the same general thing with, hey, you're doing your workout wrong because it's like just a big one is like working out hard is increasing your cortisol levels for like women or something like that. It's like, you know why? Because you're putting yourself in some stress and it's gonna spike for a second and then it's gonna come back down. It's different than chronic freaking stress because you're in an office space where you got emails and shit coming in constantly and you don't like your boss or you don't like your coworkers. Like that's the shit that kills you is the constant and not honestly not even those things but not knowing how to manage them well, right? Or just the fact that in our culture for some reason we've glorified 70-hour work weeks for people who are salaried positions making not enough money, right? Like we've done a lot of shit that just makes people feel like they're in a hole, right? But like the physical there like there are exceptions to this, but like most people, when they work out enough to be able to do the shit that they want to do in life, they're just gonna feel better. And it can kind of backfire because like you go down the hole of, I do have a few people on my roster that they're just afraid of their freaking bodies. And honestly, a lot of times they're like physical therapists because they think they should know how to like fix everything. And like your body doesn't need to be fixed. You just actually need to rest and recover. And you also need to not pay so much attention to that part of your body because you're just feeding it, right? But people don't get that.
Yeah.
So
But it's
yeah, I
also a
think
lack of
it's
trust, right?
what?
Like when you do it like that, when you're constantly trying to fix, there's then like you're not building like that sense of trust within your body.
Yes. That's probably the biggest, thank you for saying that, because this is also why I do this podcast, because I like get like a mirror back and like, but it is, you have to trust your body. Because and that's part of the rehab process, or part of the training process, is learning this. Hey, I can squat 315 pounds, right? I can trust my need to jump when I need it to jump. But what so much of the in any of these spaces is like we've figured out the perfect plan, right? For everybody. And actually, no, it's just these principles that we're trying to use to make it make sense. But people get locked into the algorithmic perfect plan. And when that perfect plan doesn't seem to be like, it's just like thinking that there's a destination to all this. I'm gonna arrive, and
Mhm.
everything's gonna be great, and I won't have to do any work. And it's like, no, that's not what the point of this shit.
Yeah,
Maybe when we die, maybe that happens, but like I don't really know. But right now, you're gonna have to wake up. You're gonna have to do some shit that makes you kind of come alive. Like I slept in this morning and it was great, but I also didn't get the dopamine hit of my like routines in the morning. And that kind of made me feel like I was like lagging a little bit. And that's life. You just learn
yeah,
from it, right?
right.
Um, I want to get to, because I'm a big body keeps the score fan. I like what's his last name? I can't remember his name. Uh,
Vanderkolk.
yes.
Vanderkolk.
Like, but I think where a lot of people go is like trauma is stored in your muscles, right? Or trauma is stored XYZ. And it's like I don't think that's what we mean when like trauma or these responses are stored in us, right? Like they're not in your bicep, right? It's in this brain body loop that we can easily create, right? But like the fight, flight, freeze response is relatively easy for like the average person to kind of understand. Um, and like, how do you see those? And like, let's just put it this way: if we were an animal and a predator was coming after us, like we have like kind of we can either try to run away, right? We can try to fight, or we can just like feign death, hope that it goes away, right? In modern times, that's not like what we do, right? Because we're not under that specific of a threat. But how does it show up? How does that type of stuff show up in people's lives? Like that they don't understand that that's what they're doing. Does that make sense?
Yes, yes. In so many ways that most people call it their personality, and then that keeps them from ever changing.
Mm, I
Or
fucking
everyone
love that. Thank you for saying that.
or that people just constantly send all their friends the memes about, being so stressed out, and it's like all we've done is just normalize it, and I'm just
Yeah,
like, "No."
yeah,
And so, I mean, it shows in so many ways, like irritability, right? Like just that snappy frustration, whether that's on your kids or your husband, your partner, whatever. Um, the that freeze response looks more like numbing, right? Like just constantly scrolling, just not feeling motivated to do things, like always chronically tired, that brain fog, like that's all dissociation,
yeah,
right? This is just like little nuanced ways of saying like, oh, you're dissociating from life right
yeah.
now, right? Um or kind of like, a little bit of like ADHD, like squirrely tendencies, like always kind of moving from one thing to the next, feeling really scattered.
This guy right here.
And it's like, yes, some of that is like,
But
there's,
then you got to manage it. Like you literally have to manage it, right?
yeah. And I think that what people don't understand, well, hold on, the perfectionism, right? Like being
Yeah,
really rigid, um, even just, I mean, perfectionism and yeah, like overworking, being
high
so high
achieving.
achieving to the point where it's like that is like the only way I feel good about myself,
Yeah,
right? Completely running yourself into the ground, things like that. Because at the end of the day, it's all the ways that you're avoiding like whatever feeling that life is eliciting within you. And if you look at like your example of like, okay, yes, if we look at nature and the impala that's being chased by the lion, blah, blah, blah. Well, we don't have impalas running around being like, well, my boss said this one thing and now I'm not good enough and da 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 da. No, like if they happen to escape that cheetah that ran away because the lion was coming or whatever, and the impala like starts shaking. If you watch these videos, if you've ever watched Animal Planet, they start shaking, right? They quite literally shake all the freaking
yeah.
chemical cocktail
Energy
that's
out.
happening in
Yeah,
their body, and they actually metabolize it, let it come up and out of them, and then they go on their way.
yeah,
But we're not doing that. We push it all down because God forbid we have emotions, right? Like We barely even let, like, toddlers have temper tantrums, and it's like,
No.
where do you think that started? Like, that we
Yeah.
thought it's like, "This is the way I get love," or "This makes me get spanked or yelled at from mom and dad, better not do that again," and so we don't actually process it the way that we're supposed to, and so then it keeps it stays in the body to just say, like, "You gonna deal with it now? How about now? How about now?" Because it's all an invitation of, like, are you gonna actually let this come to a full
Cycle.
completed cycle, yeah.
Yeah. Did you ever read that book like Burnout or something like that? Or it was like it's oriented toward a woman. Mary read it and she's like, oh, this it's not like so I'm a giant Robert Sapolsky, Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers fan. And he talks a lot about the physiologic stress response and whatnot, but like women are never allowed to really let their stress response like complete, right? Men like will do stupid shit, and that's kind of it's kind of acceptable for men to do type of stupid shit, but women like yeah it's just and it's hard to convey like stress is one of these things that it's also one of the like it's just so opaque like people know that they're stressed out but they don't really know what that means, right? Or oh it's just stress, like you go into a physician's office who has 7 minutes to deal with you, right? And it's like a lot of the things that people will tell, and even me, like I was in 2020, I was like I went to the emergency room because I was having a panic attack and I thought I was having a stroke because understand what a stroke is like from my training, and my body basically like was like, "Hey, you need to chill out," and I was just trying to scare the shit out of myself. And I went to the emergency room and had a workup done, and like the doctor like, "Dude, like I think you're just kind of stressed out," and that like was infuriating at the time.
Right.
But I look back and I'm like, yeah, he was right. And it was because I was ruminating, I was scared, I was frustrated, I was also like I was like seeing older folks literally deteriorate like from visit to visit because I was doing home health and I'd like see literally an 80-year-old person who prior to COVID was active playing golf and stuff, and then like 6 weeks into me working with them, they were just deteriorating because they had no social outlet, right? And I didn't know how to cope with that.
Yeah.
And so like, and I don't think people understand how sick your brain can make your body, right? Like, your body can help your brain, but your brain can truly F up your body. And I don't think people get how powerful that is. And I definitely didn't until I believed some along those lines, right? But yeah, like, so let's get going here because I think it'll help me in the not too distant future. But like, little kids, how should we let them like regulate themselves? Like, how do we teach little kids to regulate themselves? Because in a lot of ways, that is helpful to then that's just going to carry on into adulthood, hopefully, right?
Yeah. Um, Such a good question because, you are helping them co-regulate till about 7 or 8 years old, I believe is what the research says. And understand, and this is where like this can be feel like more pressure, right? And I think circling back to one of the first things we said is that like our goal is not to like heal, like this is the generation that heals everything. Like our
Yeah,
goal is always to just be a little bit better than the last one, right?
yeah,
Um, but like their nervous system is attuning to yours and quite literally being built from yours. Even your little baby in Mary's body right now, like it's all happening already, right? And that can feel like a lot of pressure, especially for mom, but it's like it's the truth. Like I don't know. I see like a lot of things on social media with like, like why are you always saying it's the mom's fault? And it's like if you look at the research, like it's not that it's the mom's fault, but it should just be this invitation that like we need more support. Like
support. Yeah,
you know what I mean? Like it's
yeah.
not like we shouldn't just be like saying like that's not true because it is freaking true. But
It's the support. If I me and Mary have said this the whole time, like because even prior to Mary getting pregnant, it's like the stress of the stress on the mother or how the mother perceives things to go is really impactful for how the pregnancy goes, right? And then those first few weeks after pregnancy, like, and it usually is also correlated with how much support they feel like they have,
yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And pressure from to either go back to work or all these things, right? That, yeah, it's really hard to manage, but the better you can manage it, the better things usually go, right? So,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's a really good point.
So they're learning through you, right? Through their parents, through their caretakers. And understanding that like they are going to have very big emotions and they get to be the best little teachers because I remember when Maven was like 2 and she would like lose her ever loving mind because I like cut her sandwich in a triangle or whatever even though she asked me to do that and would be like "Ah," like fully raging on like just like drop to her knees, you know, all the things. And I would feel so dysregulated for hours after that, and I would almost get pissed that within 20 minutes, less than that probably,
She was
she's
fine.
like playing again, singing, wanting to kiss my face up 10,000 times, and I'm like, "I'm not ready for that," but because they naturally know how to take themselves through that cycle. They are the animal that's
Yeah.
shaking and getting it all out, and then they're moving the hell on with their life because they're not thinking about, "Well, now, you know, mommy's mad at me," or "I shouldn't have done that because bad little girls do that," or, you know, blah, 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 blah. They naturally I think, like, that's the first thing you have to understand is that, like, we instinctually know how to do that. We have been deconditioned to do it that way.
Well, we also develop our cortical brain after 7, 8. Like our cortex is the human. It is why we are where we are. It's also our biggest freaking problem, right?
Yeah.
Like, because that's just her animal brain, like, and her emotional brain being like, all right, I can manage this. Like, I ruminated on shit for
Yes.
days, like, for a long time, and like Mary and me would have a fight early on in a relationship. I would be stewing on it for like 2 weeks afterwards. And she's like, "Are you still thinking about that?" Like, I was done with that, like, 10 minutes after it was over. And that was a big piece of me is just like I just didn't want to, I didn't think fighting. Now I believe fighting between, I don't even want to call it fighting, but like arguments,
Conflict, yeah.
conflict is normal. Conflict is actually part of growth, right? Avoiding it, like, show me a couple that avoids conflict, and I'll show you a couple that's probably going to get divorced in not a super long period of time, right?
Yeah, or
But
super, yeah.
so like it's amazing. I'm glad to hear you say that, but it's also, it just like makes so much sense. It's like they're little animals. They're like
Yeah,
they're just having fun. Yes, they're gonna if they're not getting their way, they're gonna have a pretty big response. And then like you helping them manage that, manage that wave and come back is what your job is. And then they're also teaching you. I just think there's so much. I'm reading Full Catastrophe Living, and in the early part, it's these attitudes that you're trying to cultivate, and it's like I never really thought about this, but like having a child is a tremendous learning opportunity for an adult. Like you can learn so much about how to live from the instinctual way that children live,
yeah,
right? And I kind of look at it like I don't think my parents think they can learn anything from me. Um and I'm just saying that because they have all this wisdom and experience and it's good, but like honestly, they should open themselves up to learning from me because
yeah,
I have a lot of perspective that they don't. And I should continue to learn from them. And
yeah,
and I just see that over and over again where it's like you can be learning from anybody at any time,
yeah.
really. Like,
And I think kids in particular, if you really sit and observe, is the biggest thing we can learn from them is like they are such a yes to their yeses
yeah.
in the ways that they get so excited, right? Like we don't often like show that much joy, but their return to baseline is literally just joy and excitement and squealing and all the things, right? After they've had their little freak out, most of us just keep that shit inside. It corrodes everything over time and becomes apathy and anger and all of these things, but like their return to baseline is joy, but even they're a yes to their yeses, even in the like, well, I freaking wanted that candy from the candy aisle and I'm gonna lose my shit because I'm such a yes to my yes. And it's like
Yeah.
we don't give ourselves permission to be that big to be such a yes to our yeses.
I've never thought about it that way because I've always kind of been like, get that kid, shut that kid up. Like,
But you know what I mean? And I think that's my personal take is that most generations we are swinging way too much to the
the
extremes.
pendulum
And
goes
you
too far.
look, it's way too far every time. And it's
Yeah.
like we could just find the middle ground. We
Well,
really
we're
need.
the perfect example of that because social media, even our normal media, you can't get people's attention via moderation, right? That's the hard part about it is like even my content is just like vanilla, like, hey, show up, be consistent, and like I've managed to grow my following to some extent. But if I was out there just shitting on people that I didn't like,
Yeah.
or like, starting kind of internet feuds with other people, or even just shitting on my profession more than I do. Like, and it's not that I'm against my profession. I'm just against, like, hey, don't freaking scare people. Like, you
Yeah.
just don't need to do that. But still, so many people are, and so many people just have self-limiting beliefs about what people can do based on their circumstances, and I just don't believe in that. Right? I
Yeah.
think you got to give people empowerment and that type of stuff, but it really is like I think I asked you if you'd heard listen to the Untethered Soul, and like, the the nature of life is to swing back and forth. But what we've done is we've just made that swing bigger and bigger because people undulating minimally. It's just like the person who, like, has a bad day at work and they go on a freaking bender, right? And then, like, then they make their life worse. And then they eventually they, like, they make the vow to change, and then they change for the good for a little bit. Then they hit a snag, and then they bounce right back to going way down the rabbit hole.
Yeah.
And it's like, it's little tweaks, right? And it's not even boredom per se, but it's just navigating your day to day well. And people don't like that. It's like, people want they want to arrive, or they want to go on the big trip. They want to do the thing. They want to escape. And it's like, the best way to make your life good is to make your everyday life as good as you can, right?
Yeah.
And yeah, it doesn't mean you can't go on trips and stuff. It just means, like, you want to feel good on a regular basis, make your everyday life, between when you wake up and when you go to bed, try to make that as good as you can over and over again. And
Yeah.
that's boring as shit.
But also people that, like, can only they're like, "Oh, I just do everything all or nothing." Like you said, yeah, they want to arrive, but guess what? It is the perfect way to avoid yourself,
Yeah.
to avoid feelings, because when you choose to not do it all or nothing, you're going to make mistakes along the way. There's going to be uncomfortable things that happen. You're going to have to test and tweak and polish, and you have to feel things in order to do that. If you're like, "Well, I'm just going to go all in," and then you've already, for a short period of time, because it never works,
Yeah.
experiencing what you want to be experiencing, then you're just like, you're addicted to only trying to feel good and not the things that are actually going to help you and teach you and make it sustainable.
So let's just dive into, I mentioned this earlier, but avoidance and, like, exposure therapy. I'm a giant proponent of exposure therapy, which is essentially like, if you're all or nothing, be somebody who is more like, hey, a little bit at a time can work, right? But like you said right there, it's what people are avoiding that is often the thing that is going to help them most, but they're going to have a visceral response, so it's going to be uncomfortable. But how do you guide people through kind of either exposure, or just, yeah, like, what are we avoiding that we need to actually start to lean into?
Yeah, I one of my favorite questions to ask is like, what would you have to be with if you did it that way? Or if you didn't avoid, what would you have to experience? And then that's like uncover, right? Like if you didn't eat the cake when you had the craving or whatever, then what would you have to be with? Because again, there's almost always an emotion. Our emotions are the blueprint of our behavior. They are driving the ship. And if you're not aware of that and you don't know how to work through that, then you will always fall victim to trying to avoid that. Like most people are just trying to avoid emotions their whole life.
Yeah.
Um, and I mean, I wouldn't say what I do is like exposure therapy, but like of course we have to take action. And I think that what people don't understand is that, like, depends on what you're working on. But literally just like one time. Like if we could get over the hump of just one time, it is going to completely build new neural pathways.
Yep.
And like even for instance, I did like an in-person workshop at a women's retreat last spring. I was so nervous. Like I could not hide behind my computer screen because I work from home
Yeah.
virtually, right? And I was so nervous. Like I didn't sleep well that night. I actually felt like I was going to throw up a little bit when I got there. And then of course I loved it, right? Like I wasn't going to, just because I knew I was nervous doesn't I wasn't going to stop me, right? But that took time. Like probably like 10 years ago would have stopped me. And then I went back just last weekend, 2 weekends ago, whatever, in October. And it was like, oh my God, I did it once. And this time I was fine. I slept totally fine. I was so prepared. I knew exactly, like how this was going to be set up to an extent, right? Everything changes a little
Yeah.
bit. And
Yeah.
and it was like the reflection was like so nice. It was like it literally just took one time.
Yeah.
It literally just took one time. Um
And it's like funny because, like, that one time can prove to you that you can do it, or you can tell yourself that was a fluke. And like, because people do that too, but
Yeah.
it really takes that one time and just trusting that, yeah, okay, I could handle it, right? But it depends on a lot of things. But I like that one time. That's a
Yeah.
very
And
simple rule.
I think in terms of like, what you do in terms of like that exposure, what is so important, and when you look at the research in trauma, like why do some people who have had they're dealing with PTSD from 9/11, from then till to this day versus other people who didn't. When you look at the differences is because the people who are not experiencing big T trauma from that had social love and connection that they returned to after. And
Yeah,
so if you are going to do scary things that you will have a visceral response, that's okay. No emotion is wrong. If we weren't supposed to have them, they wouldn't be part of the human experience. If you don't have someone, a support system, a guide to be there for you, to catch you, to help you process that afterwards, and then you're left to your own devices of like, I mean, even your example of like, "Oh, that was a fluke, blah, blah, blah," because your mind can be a very unsafe place to live, or you're not actually processing the emotions appropriately, then that's where I'm like, I think you need help when you need a guide if you're gonna be exposing yourself to something that does feel really scary, or, something where you're like, "I really have to overcome something," because
yeah,
doing it if you don't have the tools to do it alone, like, it could potentially do damage.
yeah, yeah. It is one of those, like, I kind of it's not, when I say exposure therapy, I'm not like talking like little steps. Like, envision a spider, right? You're afraid of spiders. Okay, let's put a
Like
spider in
phobias,
your
yeah.
face. Yeah, like I'm talking like you get better at life by like living life, by like leaning into your fears. The shit you're afraid of, like the shit you run from is the stuff that you have to learn to undertake, right? And also just be willing to fail, like, cuz you're going to, and that's okay. I think my dad sent me this article. It was like a Wall Street Journal article. I was behind a paywall, so I couldn't read it all. I'm like, what is it? What are you saying here? And he's like, basically, they launch billion-dollar rockets with the expectation that they're going to fail because they get way more data out of the failure of the rocket than they would if they were trying to like figure it out beforehand.
Yeah,
So it's like, even when it comes to blasting rockets in outer space, they have to be willing to fail, and with a pretty high price tag, to like
yeah,
learn what they need to do to make it better the next time.
yeah,
And like that response you get from failure, like, you can either look at it. I do really love. I listen to like the 5 second rule from like Mel Robbins, right? And like I love the 5 second rule is like a way to like, hey, there's shit you need to do. Just if it comes into your brain, just go do it. Like start, because it just feeds forward into like you taking action. But when it comes to like anxiety, people are like, oh, it's just energy. Like you can just use that energy to like go do the thing, or you can stew on that energy, like you said, and not metabolize it, right? Because like excitement and like fear don't feel that much different, right?
yeah,
It's just how you're like framing the situation. And most of the things, like most people, I think this is like a Jerry Seinfeld joke. It's like most people are more afraid of public speaking than they are of death or something like that. And it's like, so if you die, nobody's going to be speaking at your funeral, right? Basically, like something like that. And it's like, these are silly things. We think we're going to get judged. And I think one of my gifts honestly was early on, like in fifth or sixth grade, I realized like I could stand up in front of a class and talk, and I wasn't afraid of it. And that kind of fed forward. And like, and I look back on it like that was just me like being okay with either a probably being a class clown, but also like just doing the thing that other people are kind of afraid of, and that can be rewarding.
yeah.
So yeah, I don't know. Any last thoughts there?
I don't think so. Yeah, I mean, I think, it's just like you said, like the exposure needs to come from taking the scary action, and it's building resilience, right? Like I always take the thought process of like there is no failure, it's just feedback, which is kind of what you were saying with like the
Yeah,
launching the rocket. But it's also like it's building so much freaking resilience because if you never do the thing, then you've never made it through the other side to show your brain and your body that you didn't die,
Yeah.
that you're gonna be okay. And
Yeah.
and that is like an essential quality for us to have to live life, to just freaking live our life.
Yeah. What's our to wrap this up, what are a few like, resources that you guide people to or things to think through either on the path of working with you or either after the path too, or like what are some things that you think people should just do on a regular basis to stay in alignment with who they want to be
Yeah.
and keep living life on their terms?
I love that question. A couple things. One, get really clear on like your values. I don't think people really take the time to explore like what are my personal values at the end of my days, what feels most meaningful for me that like says like yeah, I've lived this life that I'm proud of, because especially if you're an overthinker, that gets to be a clear yes or a no. Like if you're like, oh, I don't know if I should make this decision, or but what if I do it like this, or da da da, does this just bring you closer to love and compassion and authenticity and growth and all the things that you value? If it does, do it, because most of the time, yeah, that's going to be scary, but you're not bringing the emotions into it. If it doesn't bring you closer to that, then don't do it. Like there's very few black or white yes or no's that I think are in life, but like that literally gets to be one of them. So get clear on your values. Practice mindfulness. That is like the foundation in any change that you want to do. If you do not have awareness in ways that you're operating, awareness thoughts that are contributing to your um anxiety or whatever, if you can't be the observer of those things, good luck changing it.
Yeah.
Right? Good freaking luck. We cannot intervene in a world that we cannot see. So if you're like, wow, this is so interesting, where do I start? Literally, there's really simple ways to practice mindfulness. It's not meditation. Those are two different
Yeah.
similar-ish things, but they're not the same.
Yeah.
And then like the easiest way to be like, how can I know more about what Shelly does? Like I offer breathwork classes, which I know that you're like, I'm one day, Dave, I'm gonna get you to do
I'll
it.
do it. I just gotta give
You
me the
told me
next
it's
sign up.
not really your thing.
When did I tell you that? I don't think I told you that. I'll do
um,
it.
breathwork.
I actually am loving more stuff. I do want to go on like a meditation retreat and stuff like that. And I think there's utility and you're going to learn a lot from a lot of these things. I also think like what you said is, and I'm not saying that breath work is like this. I think there's like moving and breathing and they're super powerful, but like mindfulness, we've made meditation or we've made a lot of these things into like objective type of like this is the goal here, and it's like it's literally detachment from that and just
Yeah,
see like just being the observer, which people don't get that like that. And you said it yesterday. I was joking that people are like it's woo woo. It's like no, it's just consciousness, and that's
yeah,
we should lean into that more because we are conscious creatures. Like this is a really powerful tool. So yeah,
yeah.
I'll come to your breath work. Send me the link.
October 22nd.
Okay.
No, but it's what's cool about it is that most people live in their head. Like they're not even recognizing what's happening in their body. And meditation can be a very difficult place to start with that because you can just get distracted so easily.
Yeah.
And this is like if you breathe in this pattern, you are forced to be in your body and then actually one release some of the things that are holding you back, because your body is part of your subconscious. That's
Yeah.
where the emotions and trauma and limiting beliefs are all being stored.
Yeah.
Um, and and it's a really cool gateway to just feeling like really like super powerful, like like really truly anchoring into like what the heck it is that you are in control of and
Yeah.
just letting go of the rest. Like it's very hard to explain. Most people are like, I was really skeptical of this and like I almost feel like I had like a psychedelic trip, and I'm like, yeah, and you just
I
tap
then I'm down because
your
Mary
breath.
won't let me do ayahuasca. So I'll have
Oh my god. Yeah, this would be a great bridge to ayahuasca. I
no,
heard you're supposed to prepare for that like 6 months to a year, and like you're setting your intention like every single day.
I don't know. She'll never let me do it. So and
Never.
it's not
Let's
about
work on it.
letting me. It's about I don't know.
Let's work on her.
We'll get yeah.
I want to do it one day.
All
We
right,
need
we'll do it together. If I do it with a friend, like I
meet
said,
me
yeah,
in Peru. Let's
yeah,
go.
yeah. No. Well, I appreciate your time and breath work, October 22nd. Where can people find you?
uh Most active on Instagram, Shelly Belk Coaching, and would love to chat with you there.
All right. I
Thank you.
appreciate your time. Have a great rest of your Tuesday.
Thank
Peace.
you. Bye.